Hello, folks. We were discussing previous year organic chemistry questions, and the spree of solving, learning, and unlearning and relearning the questions is on. So, let's get started. Okay, so let's begin with this question, which is very simple. Sucrose on hydrolysis gives, and you have 4 options right here. A simple question. If you know it, you can do the answer in fractions of seconds. If you look at the options, of course, what is talked about is sucrose, which is a disaccharide. And once you do the hydrolysis, you get monosaccharides. And you should know the details about that monosaccharide. That's what is asked in the question. So, the question is from the hydrolysis of sucrose. Sucrose, like you already know, the word has come from the French word sucre, which means sugar. And yes, this carbohydrate, this disaccharide, is produced naturally by plants, and once we refine that sugar, what we get is the table sugar, right? So sucrose on hydrolysis gives you monosaccharides, and the details about those monosaccharides is what is asked. So you should know what is capital D and capital L. You should also know what is small d and small l and how is it different from capital D and capital L. Then you should also know what is alpha and beta. And if you know all these 3 things, you will see that this question is a child's play. And if any language, any different form or a trap is set by an examiner, you will not fall into it. So let's see the nitty-gritties of the question. I'll start with capital D and capital L. So let me tell you, they are the relative configurations. Capital D and capital L has nothing to do with small d and small l, right? So capital D, capital L, it's simply based on, when we talk about specifically carbohydrates, we look at the second last carbon and the OH present there. If the OH is on the right, we simply say, and make sure you're writing the Fischer projection. So the idea of projection should also be clear. So if the OH is on the right side, we simply write capital D. And if it is on the left side, we simply write capital L. So you can understand it is relative, isn't it? So the letters capital D and capital L before the name of any compound indicates relative configuration of a particular stereoisomer of a compound. This is with respect to configuration of some other compound, configuration of which is known. So when I'm talking specifically about carbohydrate, you should understand this very point that this refers to their relation with a particular isomer of glyceraldehyde. So you should know how the glyceraldehyde molecule looks like. It has a CHO, it has OH, and if I show you the molecule, it will become high definition crystal clear. So look at this CHO. I'm giving carbon of the CHO as carbon number 1. This is carbon number 2 and this is carbon number 3, right? Observe the second carbon only for now. Second last carbon also is what I can say here, or in glyceraldehyde, from top if you start or from bottom if you start, it is the second carbon. So if I talk about this smallest, carbohydrate, which is glyceraldehyde, let's check OH out here. On the right, we are writing capital D. On the left, we are writing capital L, right? So what is this D and L? Relative configuration, right? What is this glyceraldehyde? A carbohydrate. So like I told you that, of course, it is very different from small d and small l. Small d and small l has to do with the optical activity. But capital D and capital L has nothing to do with the optical activity. Alright? So if I show you actually in glucose, how do we write capital D and capital L? Let's see the Fischer projection of the glucose. Out here, I want you to simply focus on the second last carbon out here. And observe the positioning of OH group, right? So in this Fischer projection, in this open chain structure of the glucose, you can see that OH is on the right side. So we are writing capital D out here. And now test this out. OH is on the left side. So we are writing capital L here. And now let's understand how it is different from small d and small l. So here OH was helping us, was leading us. But what about small d and small l? Who will lead us there? Well, PPL will lead us there. PPL. Yeah, PPL, plane polarized light. So you should know what it is, right? So when we talk about this plane polarized light, I'll show you how things happen and we'll come back to this small d and small l. So what we take is a light source emitting light, and the light is moving in, traversing in all the direction. Okay? And what do we use then? We use a polarizer. What is a polarizer? Since the light was traversing in all the direction, what a polarizer does is, you will see the light's orientation now only in one direction, only in one plane it is moving. Right? So we say the light has been polarized. Okay? It has been polarized by the polarizer. Now it is, traversing only in one plane. So it's a polarized light now. And now what do? We put a particular compound here, and let's say it's an optically active compound or it's a chiral compound. Okay? So if we take this optically active compound and let the plane polarized light pass through it, or simply PPL pass through it, you will see that if this is the plane polarized light was traversing in, there can be two types of rotation. One is maybe clockwise and one is maybe anti-clockwise, right? So depending on the rotation, we call that a particular compound is small d or small l. If the plane polarized light has been rotated clockwise, we use small d, and if it is rotated anti-clockwise, we use small l. Now read it out. Right? So direction of rotation, if it is clockwise, we use small d, or we may also use plus. That means the same. Both are same. Alright? Use only one. It's not that you have to use both together while writing the name. One is what you can use, small d or plus. What this signify? That the light has been rotated clockwise. What about anti-clockwise rotation? Then we use small l or a minus. So either of them. Cool? So now if you understand glucose, yes, we can have plus glucopyranose, and you can see that we can also write here, look at this, minus. So out here I can write minus if it is rotating plane polarized light anti-clockwise. But the speciality of glucose is that it rotates the plane polarized light in the clockwise direction, whereas fructose will rotate the plane polarized light in the anti-clockwise direction. Okay, so out here plus should be sorted. Now this capital D should be sorted. Alpha is what is left now to be addressed. Alpha. Check out the OH here, it is below out here, right? And beta, now let's check the beta thing out here. Beta OH is out here on the top. Please see. What are these alpha and beta? They are anomers. So they are the anomeric carbons that we are looking at. Look at this carbon and this carbon out here. These are the anomeric carbons. And alpha and beta, again, when we have this kind of a cyclic structure of this glucopyranose ring, this is the pyranose ring that we are talking about, right? OH, if it is below, we are using alpha, and OH, if it is above, we are using beta. How do we remember this? I have seen students getting confused, so you do not have to get confused here. Beta is a term that I want to make you understand it with. Beta is a general neutral term, just like an actor can be used for a male, female or the third gender. Teacher can be used for a male, female or a third gender. Beta is also a term which is gender neutral. You can use it for a male, female or gender neutral. Beta. And there's a popular song which goes by the Hindi lyrics, Papa कहते हैं बेटा बड़ा नाम करेगा. What's an English translation to it? Father says, my beta, my child, will earn the fame. How will beta earn the fame? Only if beta is on the top. So please remember, when we are talking about beta or beta, OH is on the top. So remember it by this, and it will be retained forever, isn't it? So now check it out. OH below, alpha. OH above, beta. Of course, look at the carbon that we are looking at. This is the first carbon which is coming after this oxygen. Okay? So when we talk about sucrose, there is a very important linkage that you should know as well. What is that linkage's name? It is nothing but glycosidic linkage. Check it out. The question was now about the hydrolysis of that particular glycosidic linkage, sucrose hydrolysis. So this is where the hydrolysis will happen. Put a OH here and a H here, and this is what you're going to get the answer of. You can see that in glucose, OH is below, and in fructose, so this is fructose, the OH is above. So here we are getting beta and here we are getting alpha, isn't it? So two monosaccharides are joined together by an oxide linkage formed by the loss of water molecule. And check it out, when we do the hydrolysis of sucrose, we get D here and a D here. That means when we make the Fischer projection, the second last carbon, if we observe, the OH is on the right hand side. Here as well as here when we are talking about glucose or fructose. Plus and a minus. We know that when we are talking about plus, glucose, that means, has rotated the plane polarized light in the clockwise direction, whereas fructose has rotated the plane polarized light in the anti-clockwise direction. Sorted. And now let's also understand the product from the structures. Check it out. This is what we have. This is the sucrose. We have done the hydrolysis. That means with the help of water, there is a lysis that has happened. Let's put a OH here and a H here for the water, right? And what do you see? OH is below here, so alpha here. OH is above here, so beta here, right? And for both, it is D. The answer is already in front of you. But let's quickly reinforce the concepts that we have done. Sucrose consists of a D-glucose subunit and a D-fructose subunit linked by a glycosidic linkage, and between carbon 1 of the glucose in the alpha position and carbon 2 of the fructose in the beta position, right? So sucrose is dextrorotatory. When I talk about this plane polarized light, right, and let it pass through a solution which is containing sucrose, we will see that this plane polarized light is rotated in a clockwise direction, right? But after the hydrolysis has happened, please see what we have got is a glucose and a fructose, and also observe the angle of rotations here, plus 52.5 degree for glucose. So it's a clockwise rotation that has happened for glucose, and the fructose produces anti-clockwise rotation. And see the degree also, 52.5 degree and minus 92.4 degree. Clearly, if you see the overall solution, there will be an inversion. We were starting with sucrose, which was dextrorotatory, right? But we are getting a mixture of an equimolar mixture of the two monosaccharides, okay? The equimolar mixture has been produced. So this is very important, that sucrose is an invert sugar. The reason is, since the levorotation of fructose is minus 92.4 degree, is more than dextrorotatory, that is plus 52.5 degree, right? So glucose is plus 52.5 degree, fructose is minus 92.4 degree. The mixture, overall mixture, is levorotatory. Initially it was dextro, after hydrolysis it is levo, and hence the name inverted sugar is coming out here. Inversion of the degree of rotation has happened. From a dextrorotatory, something has become levorotatory. So hence invert sugar is what we use for sucrose as well. So you get a hang of it. And hence, now let's see the question. Sucrose on a hydrolysis has given us, for both there should be D. For both, no glucose, Only glucose and fructose should be your answer. So glucose and fructose should be your answer. D and D, D and D. Alpha here and a beta here, not vice versa. So if we have addressed the nitty-gritties, this question is now solvable, no matter how the examiner may set the trap for you. The right answer is option B. Alright, now you get this question which is like a complimentary gift for the NEET aspirants. The question is, the following metal ion activates many enzyme, participates in the oxidation of glucose to produce ATP, and with sodium is responsible for the transmission of nerve signals. Question is easy. The third line of it, which is this line, with sodium is responsible for the transmission of nerve signals. And if I play with you rapid fire round, and if I say sodium dash pump is responsible for the transmission of nerve signals, immediately you will fire at me potassium, isn't it? Sodium, potassium, pump. So third was the main cue here. But let's do one thing. Let's do autopsy of all the three lines. We already understood that potassium is going to be the right answer, needless to say. So we even don't need options to answer this kind of a question. This is like a rapid fire question that is asked in the NEET examination. And you being biology students, I'm sure you can nail it the moment you see it, right? But let's understand each and every line of this as well, so that we can never ever get wrong if a question like this comes. So the following metal ion activates many enzymes. In fact, the potassium ion is responsible for activating around 60 plus enzymes. So around 60 enzymes are activated by our very own potassium ion. The second line says participates in the oxidation of glucose to produce ATP. You being biology students know it very well that glucose undergoes glycolysis to give you pyruvate, which enters the Krebs cycle and gives you many products. And some of the products are going to enter the ETC, electron transfer chain, and that is what that produces ATP. But hey, where is this potassium involved here? So of course, while this whole process is happening, there are many enzymes used, and some of those enzymes are of course activated by none other than the potassium ion. Third is the most important. The cue here that is talking about is responsible for the transmission of nerve signals. So let's do one thing. Let's see it, because yes, this is a question that belongs to the enzyme and drug target, and let's understand what's going on out here. So sodium and potassium chemically differ in their ability to penetrate cell membranes. Both are group 1 elements. Both are alkali metals. As we go down the group, the size increases. So what is being talked about is that their penetration is different. Okay. Though both are having the same kind of charges, both are having the same kind of configuration, both belongs to the same group, but their penetration is different, right? So when I talk about this kind of, different penetration ability, this causes sodium ions to be more abundant in outside of cells and potassium ions to be more abundant within cell fluids. Okay, so what is going to happen is for every 3 sodium plus that goes outside, the 2K plus enters inside. I'll just show you how it happens inside the membrane as well. So these potassium ions within the cell activate many enzymes and participate in oxidation of glucose to produce ATP, like I already told you. Sodium is responsible for transmission of nerve signals, but along with potassium. So sodium potassium pump, something that you've done religiously in biology, right? So let's see what's going on. Everybody, you know that when we talk about the extracellular space, right? And the exoplasm, and this is the membrane that we are talking about, which has these sodium potassium pumps. And of course you can see sodium ion, potassium ion. Sodium ion by itself is not sufficient, potassium ion by itself is not sufficient, but this jodi, this combination of two, this Jay-Viru jodi or the sodium potassium couple is what is very important for the transmissions that happen. If something is hot, I am going to respond to it. Who is helping me? Sodium potassium pump. If there is any reaction that our body is showing to a stimulus, who is involved? Sodium-potassium pump. Right, so what is going on? Look at this. We have a sodium-potassium pump out here. Observe that what is going to happen? Na plus coming here, going out, right? And then you can see more sodium outside. K plus is entering inside and goes inside. For every 3 Na plus that goes outside, 2 K plus comes and goes inside. And the result is this. Look at this, that what is happening? There's different concentration outside and inside, isn't it? And this difference is what is responsible mainly, right? And to balance out things, you know that what is going to happen is potassium needs to make a move. So we will not get to the movement of potassium and how it is happening through the K plus pump here. But I'm more interested in that this kind of a concentration difference actually is producing what we call as gradient, isn't it? And that is what that creates an impulse. Impulse is something which is very beautiful, which is very interesting, which is mind-blowing actually. And this impulse is nothing but electrochemical electrical signal. So electro, if it is concerned, yes, we are talking about physics. Electrochemical, chemical when we are saying, of course, we are talking about chemistry. And since this whole electrochemical thing is happening inside the body, yes, you studied in biology. And that's a great conglomeration of 3 fields together, isn't it? And that's why you, being NEET aspirants, need to know the 3 subjects very well, isn't it? So the question was pretty simple and the right answer to this question is option C. Alright, now let's take a look at this question which says, any sol on cleavage with HI gives. Question is simple. All that you need to know is what is any sol and then it is all common sense. So let's check out the options as well. Options are given in front of us. So any sol, the structure should be crystal clear. This is what the structure is, OCH3 group attached to benzene. Perfect. The question belongs to nucleophilic substitution reaction, but if you do not know the mechanism also, like I told you, you can do it with your common sense. How? Let's check that first. Let's check the common sense first. Everybody knows OCH3, oxygen has a lone pair, can participate in resonance. If I talk about the possibility of cleavage, one is this possibility, right? The green one. And one is the second possibility is this one. The blue one, right? Now let's come to the consensus why the cleavage cannot happen from the first green one out here. Why we can't go green here? Of course, you know the lone pair out here of oxygen is in conjugation with the double bond of the benzene. So what will be there? There will be plus R. And if there is plus R, of course a partial double bond character will come if you make the resonating structures of any sol. So it is impossible for the cleavage to happen from 1. Rather, it will happen from 2. And if it does, you know how we can write HI. H with a delta plus, I with a delta minus. Oxygen, with oxygen, you know that there is delta minus. With carbon, we can write a delta plus. Opposite attracts all through organic chemistry, which you know by now. So, with minus, put a plus. So, with O, we will write H, and with the CH3 we will write I, so that the 2 products that you get out here is phenol and methyl iodide. As simple as that. Now there is the possibility that OH can further react with HX, which is what that happens if I take, let's say, dialkyl ether, ROR. What happens in ROR is, since you already know that ether is very less reactive a functional group, so some drastic conditions are required and excess of HX is required. So when we are adding HX, and when I'm talking about HX, yes, you should know reactivity of HI is maximum, then HBr and then HCl, right? So let's say I'm taking excess of HX when I'm talking about this dialkyl ether. Of course, the reaction goes like this, that we get an alcohol and Rx. But the reaction doesn't stop here. ROH further react with HX to give you Rx. The outcome is you get 2 moles of Rx out here when you are going to take ether, dialkyl ether, and react it with excess of HX. So ROH further reacts, but will phenol further react? Here is where you need to think that. Again, OH group out here, common sense. Oxygen has a lone pair and it is in conjugation with a double bond. So if that is the case, there is a double bond character that will come between the oxygen and the carbon of the aryl ring out here. So this aryl oxygen bond is very strong. So forget about further nucleophilic substitution happening, right? So the answer is right in front of you, which is option D. But let's do the autopsy of the question and get into the finer layers of it. Okay? So this reaction, Anisole on reaction with HX, the mechanism is SN2 mechanism, right? Nucleophilic substitution, and bond making and breaking will occur simultaneously. You will get a high energy transition state. There will be no formation of carbocation here, which happens in SN1. So out here, let's see what's going on. Anisole, I can write HI like this because you know that there is difference in electronegativity of H and I, right? So what happens is the lone pair of oxygen can attack this electropositive hydrogen, and the outcome is, look at this, this is what you get, that oxygen attains a plus over it, which is not very stable. And if there is a nucleophile present nearby, you know what is going to be followed, isn't it? So I minus, our nucleophile in this case, of course, can react in this way so that bond making and breaking occur simultaneously, and the outcome is what you already know. We get phenol and methyl iodide. Overall reaction is this. Check it out. The mechanism is SN2 mechanism, right? The mechanism is happening via formation of the transition state. So you should know the mechanism, you should know the products, and you know the answer. The right answer here was, like I told you, a common sense question and a common sense answer, which is option D, phenol and methyl iodide. Alright, now we have a very fundamental question coming. A tertiary butyl carbocation is more stable than a secondary butyl carbocation because of which of the following? Let's see the options and then we will lead to the right direction. The options are plus R effect of methyl, minus R effect of methyl, hyperconjugation, minus I effect of methyl group. Question is from General Organic Chemistry GOC, very fundamental question. You should know it in order to know any of the organic chemistry questions, right? So the question is based on the stability of intermediate basically. And when I talk about the stability of intermediate, I want to give you a magic wand. Before I do, let's address the elephant in the room, which is, what is this tertiary butyl carbocation and secondary butyl carbocation? Two simple names coming in front of you. The two simple intermediates mentioned out here are tertiary butyl. You know what is a tertiary group? And tertiary butyl is nothing but carbocation attached to the 3 methyl groups like this. The carbon with a plus and 3 methyls. What about secondary butyl? Of course, 4 carbons. And the plus is on this carbon where on one side we have methyl, on the other side we have ethyl. So this becomes a secondary butyl carbocation. And the moment you see it, you know that there is no kind of conjugation involved. Conjugation can be of many types, can be double bond in conjugation with a double bond. You can have a double bond in conjugation with a lone pair. You can have a double bond in conjugation with a negative charge. You can have a double bond in conjugation with a plus, and so forth. But there is no such conjugation present here. So if no conjugation, then no resonance. So A and B are out of the scene. Hyperconjugation? That may seem to be the right answer. But yes, option D, inductive effect, is also applicable the moment we see methyl group. But minus I effect? Hey, since when is methyl going to show you a minus I effect? Not possible, right? So let's do one thing. Let's do the postmortem of the question layer by layer. Before I do, let me give you a magic wand. The magic wand is AERHI. The moment I talk about the stability of intermediates, AERHI should strike the doors of your mind. A, aromaticity, E, equivalent resonating structure, R, resonance, H, hyperconjugation, I, inductive effect. The sequence is very important. Aromaticity is the leader of stabilizing effects, right? Then we have equivalent resonating structure, which is more dominating than resonance. Then comes, of course, resonance, and then hyperconjugation, and then least is inductive effect. But terms and conditions apply. There is a star, there is an asterisk here, which you know. When I talk about halogens, out of resonance and inductive effect is more dominating than resonance effect when we are talking about halogens. Point to be noted, right? So, when I'm talking about this kind of a tertiary butyl carbocation or secondary butyl carbocation, resonance is already out of the picture, aromaticity is out of the scene, equivalent resonating structure, forget about it. So the only things that you're left with is hyperconjugation and inductive effect. So let's do one thing. Let's just take these two up and understand them. You know that when we talk about hyperconjugation, the game is all about alpha hydrogens. More the alpha hydrogens, more the hyperconjugated structures, more the hyperconjugated structures, more the stability, right? So when I talk about hyperconjugation, of course, we understand how to think of. We think in terms of alpha hydrogens. What about inductive effect? In inductive effect, we simply follow the Maha Mantra that we need to stabilize the charges. We need to neutralize the charges. Charges are a reason of sorrow. We don't have to intensify the sorrows. We have to, neutralize the sorrows. We have to neutralize the charges. So, if there's a carbocation involved, of course, the electron donating group, or I can also say the plus I group out here, will help us in neutralizing the charges. But if there is an electron withdrawing group or a minus I group attached, then that will intensify the positive charge, which is what we do not want. We want to stabilize. We do not want to destabilize the carbocation. Like in our lives, we want to stabilize our lives, not destabilize it, right? So, of course, plus I groups, and the moment I say methyl group, plus I group is something that, of course, strikes your mind, right? So, let's check it out. When I talk about hyperconjugation and inductive effect, you know what dominates what. You know the magic wand. You have the magic wand, so use it very judiciously, very smartly, very wisely, right? And this young generation is very wise, so you know where to use what. So when I talk about carbocation stability, of course, number of alpha hydrogen will play a role, number of plus I groups will play a role. Stability of carbocation is directly proportional to the number of alpha hydrogen as well as number of plus I groups. And we know hyperconjugation is going to be more dominating than plus I effect. So let's take a look at the tertiary butyl carbocation and secondary butyl carbocation. Count the alpha hydrogens in the first one. 9 alpha hydrogens. Count the alpha hydrogens in the second one. 5 alpha hydrogens. Count the plus I groups in the first one. 3 plus I groups. Count the plus I groups in the second one. Of course, 2 plus I groups. So when we take the overall verdict, when we look at the overall picture, this is what is the final verdict out here. 9 alpha hydrogen, 3 plus I group when we are talking about tertiary butyl carbocation. Whereas when we are talking about secondary butyl carbocation, 5 alpha hydrogen and 2 plus I groups. So of course, the question was nowhere giving us the option of plus I effect. It was just talking about these options out here. Minus I, plus R, minus R. Nowhere plus I was written, right? So the right answer automatically becomes option C, which is hyperconjugation. Again, we have a very simple question. You know it or you do not know it. There is no midway, right? The question is which of the following is a basic amino acid, and the options are alanine, tyrosine, lysine, serine. How to do such kind of a question? Either you have a trick to remember that When I talk about amino acids, it can be acidic, basic, or neutral. So you already know the structures of all of them and you know which amino acid lies in which classification, right? So for this, of course, the knowledge of structure is very important, or there is some trick that you may remember. So I would always suggest you to remember the different types of amino acids by their structure by writing and practicing. Okay, the logic is simple, right? So when I talk about this question, of course, this is from amino acid biomolecules yet again. And the important thing that you know already about amino acid is there is an amine group, NH2 group also attached, and there is a COOH group also attached. So amino acids, when we say, is an organic compound having an amino group and carboxyl group at same carbon. Same carbon has this COOH and NH2 and one hydrogen. This is the common structure for any amino acid. All that changes is this G out here. That's it. So it is very easy to remember. That's why I'm saying it's better to remember them with the structures. Okay? So this is what I want to tell you here, that NEET examination takes care of all different aspects. Number one, your visual apparatus. How much can you visualize? Number two, logical aspect. How much logics can you apply? Third, subjective type, where there's some subjectivity involved. And there are one or two questions wherein some cramming may also be required. And when I say cramming, it's not actually cramming, but practice. And practice makes anything perfect. So out here, this is more of a conglomeration of biology as well as chemistry. So amino acids you take up in both chemistry as well as in biology. So needless to say, biomolecules should be your forte, right? So neutral, of course, acidic, of course, basic, of course, is something the moment you read it, you can understand, you can decipher what it means. When I talk about, let's say, the types of amino acids are classified as acidic, basic, or neutral, depending upon the relative number of amino and carboxyl groups in their molecule. If more COOH groups are attached, you know that one COH and one NH2 is common to all the amino acids. So what may differ is, there might be places where more NH2 are present, there might be places where more COH is present, right? And that decides what is going to be acidic or basic, isn't it? So when I talk about acidic, let's see what's going to be there when I'm talking about acidic amino acids. Check it out. Of course, the COOH groups will be more, or I can say carbonyl groups are going to be more as compared to the amino groups. What about neutral? Of course, the amino group should be equal to the carboxyl group. The NH2 that we have should be equal to the number of COOH groups that we are going to have, right? The third one, the basic amino acids, needless to say, the amino groups will be more than the carboxyl group, and hence amino acids which contain more than one basic amino NH2 group is going to be our basic amino acid. So let's check alanine. If you know the structure, you know that we have a methyl here. The common structure is this. Everybody should know it. This is the common structure. Only thing that is changing is a G out here, right? H, COH and NH2 is common to all amino acids. So out here we have methylene alanine, which is neutral. Okay, we have here CH2, this benzene ring, and this OH at the para position here. So this is again a neutral. Okay. Serine is neutral. Yet again, we have CH2OH group out here. But lysine, it's a basic amino acid. More number of amino groups are there as compared to the carbonyl group. So you know the right answer to this very easy question, which belongs to knowing the structure of different amino acids. And if you know the lysine becomes the right answer for this question. Now let's check this question out, which is based on ozonolysis. The question is, an alkene on ozonolysis gives methanol as one of the products. Its structure is, and the options are given in front of you. Well, the great, profound intellectuals know that chemistry paper is incomplete without a question on ozonolysis. A very important concept it is in organic chemistry. So I will also give you a trick here. The question is very simple. We will also look at the mechanism of ozonolysis here. The question talks about basically going retro. The molecules, the 4 options are given. In all 4 of them, you would have to do the ozonolysis. You have to do the lysis. Okay, lysis means breaking. And if you break, all that you have to do is put oxygen there, right? At both the places of the double bond. Here, 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 and here, here. And the question is about which of the 4 options. One of them will give us methanol. So, it's a thumbs down if you do not know what methanol is. That's the first requisite for the question, of course. So you should know that the hunt is for this particular species out there. This aldehyde, the smallest aldehyde which is possible with 1 carbon, methanol. The hunt is about this particular species. So let's get going. Let's get started. The question is from ozonolysis. Very simple, very easy question. Let's understand first what is ozonolysis. So we have a double bond, we take O3. This is how O3 is going to attack, right? This is what that happens. You get this kind of a temple structure. Then what happens is ozonide gets formed. This is a very important intermediate which gets formed. And then on reaction with zinc and water, you get the ozonolysis product, right? So what you get is, in simple terms, if this is the alkene which is given to you, you just cleave the bond, put the 2 oxygens across the double bond like this, right? So now let's do one thing. For all the options, let's do this kind of an ozonolysis. We are going to cleave. What is going to happen is, you can see one of the oxygens is going with the zinc and we are getting zinc oxide. The 2 oxygens of the ozone O3 molecule. So 3 oxygens are there, 1 is going with zinc, 2 of the oxygens you are attaching like this across the double bond, just like this. So let's take our axe and do this kind of a lysis, okay? So the first one is this compound. Let's break this double bond, put 2 oxygens. Now where are we getting here? Methanol, right? So here what we are getting is aldehyde, CHO here and a CHO here, right? Which is a part of this kind of carbon system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 carbons out here. And of course, we are successful in opening the ring here, but however, unsuccessful in getting methanol here, right? The next one is this. Let's take our axe. Let's do the lysis. We get, hey, observe what we have just got. You are, of course, getting a CO, 2 hydrogens attached. That is HCOH. That means this is where you're getting, of course, the product that is asked in the question, methanol. So this is the particular option which will give you the right answer, but let's not put our axe of ozonolysis. Let's use it further for option C and check out what's going on here. Again, the cycle has been broken, the double bond, put oxygens across it, and the compound that you get is this. Nowhere is methanol involved here. Let's check for option D also. This is what we get. Here we are getting rather ethanol, and we get this cyclohexane ring attached to a CHO group, right? So please check here also. No methanol is getting produced. So the right answer to this question is, of course, option B, in which when we are doing ozonolysis of this compound, we are getting methanol, which was what was asked. So read the options and go with the right answer. The right answer is none other than option B. Now let's take a look at this question based on Grignard reagent, one of the very, very important reagents of organic chemistry. The question is, reaction between acetone and methyl magnesium chloride, which you of course know, we are talking about Grignard's reagent. So reaction between acetone and methyl magnesium chloride followed by hydrolysis will give And the options are secondary butyl alcohol, tertiary butyl alcohol, isobutyl alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. I love these kind of questions where different concepts are merged together, because this question is also testing your skills of knowing the common names, knowing the behavior of this methyl magnesium chloride, knowing how this kind of a Grignard reagent is going to attack on acetone, and deciding for yourself that what kind of an alcohol will be formed, right? So the question is, of course, based on simple preparation of alcohol from Grignard's reagent. Let's see what is Grignard reagent. All right. So this methyl magnesium chloride, what makes it special? What makes it special is when we are talking about actually CH3Cl, you know that chlorine is more electronegative than carbon, right? So a delta minus comes here and a delta plus comes here. But when we are talking about CH3MgCl, we are talking about organometallic chemistry. There is an organic compound CH3 and we are talking about this metal magnesium. Magnesium is electropositive and this methyl is now going to become electronegative with respect to, of course, magnesium. So here there is a plus and here will come a minus, right? Do you understand why this becomes very important? Is when carbon is attached with halogen. If this was the chemistry being talked about, CH3Cl, carbon was electropositive and chlorine was electronegative. But now that we're talking about magnesium here attached with methyl, of course, what we are talking about now is carbon attaining a minus, whereas magnesium is, of course, plus, right? So these kind of charges you're able to understand, right? These kind of partial charges, if you are able to understand, you have fully understood the concept, because chemistry is all about opposite attracts, isn't it? So check it out. Methyl magnesium chloride, CH3MgCl, Grignard reagent, methyl magnesium bromide or chloride doesn't affect anything about the concept anyhow. What happens is it is an organomagnesium compound or organometallic compound where R refers to an alkyl or aryl group and X refers to halogen. Perfect. We know what is speciality here, that metal is electropositive and carbon becomes electronegative. Whereas, like I told you, when just X was concerned, the halogen was concerned, carbon was having partial positive. But now this magnesium is coming. Here, look at this. This carbon attains a delta minus and magnesium, that is our metal here, attains a plus here. So, if we just observe the polarities that has come over carbon, if we observe the delta charges that has come over carbon, carbon in the first one is delta plus, carbon in the second one is delta minus, there is reversal of polarity. Just this reversal is happening. And this is what we simply write as umplong, which means reversal of polarity, right? So this is what that makes organometallic compound very special. So when we talk about Grignard reagent, they're extremely good nucleophiles reacting with electrophiles such as carbonyl groups. In carbonyl group, you know that this carbon-oxygen bond is highly polar. Oxygen being more electronegative can, make the electron density come towards itself such that O can be written like this, O minus and a carbon plus. The moment I write like this, you can see electron deficient carbon here, right? You can see carbon acting like an electrophile here, right? So if it is acting like an electrophile, what is going to happen? It will be in a hunt of a nucleophile. And what we are saying, this CH3MgX, here we have this methyl which is having a minus here. If I'm simply writing without writing the partial charges, in order to make you understand, you know that opposites are going to attract. So with the plus comes a minus, and with the minus comes plus. With O will come this MgX, right? So this is what that is happening. Simple opposites are attracting here. So check it out. The carbonyl compound out here, please check. We are talking about acetone. We are talking about Grignard reagent. We know that methyl is going to be the nucleophile here, which will get attached to the carbon of this carbonyl. And the final thing which is going to happen is this. Look at this. Opposites are attracting. Oxygen gets attached with MgCl, and with the carbon comes another methyl. And now if you do the hydrolysis, what is going to happen is, check this out, OH comes here and MgClOH gets eliminated, so that the final product is a 3-degree alcohol. Check it out. Let's revise it. This is what that is happening. Look at this. Opposites are attracting. Final thing is O minus, Mg plus and Cl here. MgCl gets attached to this O minus, and with the carbon comes the CH3. So the final thing is, this is what you get. An attack of nucleophile on electrophilic carbonyl carbon happens such that the major product that you get is the tertiary butyl alcohol. 3-degree alcohol, right? This OH is attached to the carbon which is attached to 3-alkyl group. That's why we are saying it tertiary. Cool? So the right answer, tertiary butyl alcohol. Where are you? Here it is. Option B becomes the right answer. Now the final question is, which of the following alkane cannot be made in good yield by Wood's reaction? What better end than Wood's reaction itself? One of the very, very important named reactions. Let's check out the options. 2,3-dimethylbutane. Option B, N-heptane. Option C, N-butane. Option D, N-hexane. Cool. The question is, in fact, very simple. If you know Woods very well, which I'm sure this is a guy that everyone knows very well, this guy Woods. And the Woods reaction is something which is famous for giving you the product which has even number of carbons. Why? Because if I'm talking about Rx, write 2 moles of it, it is going to give you RR. So odd plus odd gives you even, and even plus even anyhow will give you even. It is only when you're taking 2 different kinds of alkyl halides that there is a possibility of getting the product which has odd number of carbons. Like Rx is getting reacted with R-X. That's only the possibility where you can get odd number of carbons in the product as one of the products. Why one of the products? Please check, R-X can react with its own self in the presence of sodium ether, right? Rx can also combine with its own self, and R-X and Rx can combine and give you R-R as the product. So there are 3 possibilities of product. RR, R-R and R-R. Right? So out of this, only this is the possibility where you're getting odd number of carbons in the product. And of course, you can see that multiple mixture of products are formed. So anyhow, yield of any of these would not be significant. That it would be of use for the commercial purposes, for industrial purposes, it will be of no use. So the moment you see a question like this, odd number of carbons if are present as the options should be the right answer for you, which I'm sure you can realize is only in option B, right? So you already know the right answer for this question. Anyhow, the question is from the preparation of alkanes. Let's take it. Let's understand it layer by layer. Let's see what is sodium doing, what is ether doing, why are we taking sodium ether together, and let's get to know more about it, though you have understood it very quickly, right? So let's check it out. When I'm talking about Wood's reaction, yes, we take sodium along with ether, wherein ether actually is used for a particular reason. Why? And when I'm saying ether, dry ether particularly. So why is dry ether used with sodium? The reason is, you know how reactive sodium is, right? A small piece of sodium may cause huge damage to the skin, to the face, to the hand. So, of course, sodium, is very reactive. So, dry ether helps in preventing this kind of a blast that sodium is capable of producing. Okay, so inert solvent is required to prevent interference with the reaction. Sodium will immediately react with oxygen and will cause fumes, will cause flames, will cause havoc, right? So Wood's reaction, of course, two important things. Na, ether is what is required, and you take halogen alkyl halide, you take Rx. And when I'm talking about a general reaction, let me show only Rx first, right? So Rx combines with its own self and give you RR. What is this RR? It is having even number of carbons, and you know that it can never be methane. CH4 not possible, right? Well, if you're going to take different alkyl halides, that's the only possibility where odd number of carbons can be seen in the product. But there is a but to it. But along with the other products, right? So you can check that there's no one product that you're getting here, but multiple products. And the difficulty is in the separation here. All three of them are alkanes, right? And it is very difficult to separate them, and yield is also insufficient. So why waste resources when the yield is not sufficient? In separating the three products out here, whose separation anyhow is very expensive and is going to be cumbersome, right? Is going to be difficult. So why waste time when there are yields which are insignificant anyhow? So option A is something that can be formed from even number of carbons. If you take this, 2 moles of this, you're good to go. The second one, you can imagine 7 carbons. So you have to take, let's say, 3 and a 4 combination, or many other possibilities out here. But you can understand that here we have odd number of carbons, which makes it, one of the products which is going to have very insignificant yield. Okay, so B looks like the perfect answer for us, but let's test others also. N-butane, again even number of carbons, and N-hexane, again even number of carbons, right? Examiner will never confuse you by giving you 2 options with the odd number of carbons. Test it by yourself, right? So when I talk about the Wood's reaction is used for the preparation of higher alkanes containing even number of carbon atoms. And that's what is Wood's reaction famous for. So I'm sure the question was super simple. All is well that ends well, and this has ended very well. The right answer to this question is option B, N-heptane. So we have come to the end of the organic chemistry previous year 2020 paper discussion. You've realized that the paper was very simple. Out of the 15 questions of organic chemistry, 13 could have been solved by everyone. It was very simple. Exam is always very easy. All that the examiner can play with is your emotions, your psychology. And that's what we are preparing you for. All the best and keep learning.